I wanted to start off with a question that was kind of answered by David and Doug, and that is, the differences in the compartmental versus the micro simulation approach. But then go beyond that. What happens when you have the two models and they come up with different results? Can you reconcile those? Is it possible to combine micro simulation with macro simulation in some way? So David or the
or Doug first. Give me some time to think of an answer.
So I can try to take a shot at this. The micro simulations or individual-based simulations are, disaggregated macro models. Supposedly, when you aggregate the model, you should have the same when you get everybody behaving in the same way and so on and so forth, then you should have the same output in a micro simulation model than a macro simulation model. So that's why one of the first things that we do in the micro model or agent-based model is to dock the model, right? So we have a lot of heterogeneity in the population that we need to recognize, but if you have a compartmental model that produces some result, you simply go to your micro model and put a set parameters to be the same to mimic those compartmental models. So just to mimic the structure. If when they produce the same thing, then you can let loose with a heterogeneity and connections. And if they are different, the results, then you know that heterogeneity and those connections don't matter, right? If there's no error in the structure, you dock your model, and then when you lose, when you let all the same parameters vary according to how you think it should vary, any discrepancy must be done.
That and a couple other things to think about. One of the things that I think is implied in David's response, especially around docking, is there is, and this goes back to, I think, something that Ken said earlier. I think modelers now expect there to be a lot more scrutiny and transparency in the model development. We've all learned that when that doesn't happen, the models, I won't say become worthless, but they're not worth very much. And this may sound like a cop-out. There's two Davids, David in the above row. This may sound like a cop-out, but I think it's often so much apples and oranges when we compare models that I think looking at the quantitative predictions or those metrics as the model agreeing is not the be all and end all. In particular, often you learn as much about why these models don't seem to agree. You learn as much from that than if you'd learn anything if they actually agreed more. And because as David M. pointed out, there's just so much that an agent-based model might be doing that has no, like social interactions. So if you've got social networks in there, you can be modeling something that is very much empirical, but possibly the compartmental models have no way of incorporating that. So it's not so much converging. I actually think, going back to if I remember this history with SysNet, I think having models not being integrated, but connected, where you're using, let's say, microsimulation or agent-based models for one part of it, and that the results from that get put into a population level dynamic model, let's say. We're seeing more and more of that. Certainly we're seeing in agent-based models much greater integration of social structure and social network information that I think is incredibly helpful for public health types of applications. So part of it is, these are complicated things and we don't spend enough time talking to each other. I think that's the great thing about the symposium. And so multiple models where the modelers and the scientists and the community members are in some form of dialogue probably can really push the computational modeling community forward much faster than anything else, really.
Thank you. Well, we'll come back to this because I think it will be one of the key topics of discussion: model integration, model comparison, and just really different ways of trying to address many of the challenges which might call for those ideas. I want to ask a question, or the next question is regarding now the policy side of things. So we'll start with Dr. Salazar, but we'll ask others. Although two questions were submitted that are related. So one by Xisheng, one by Andy Highland. So let me combine and paraphrase. But I guess one of the challenges is that for many of the policies or regulations that FDA needs to consider, there isn't much data. So the example is the nicotine regulation, where then you relied on expert elucidations. But of course, those are hard to do, they're expensive. Modelers are not necessarily trained to do so. So the question for both, Dr. Shan asked if you would consider using, for instance, discrete choice experiments or experimental tobacco market data to inform those policy effects. Dr. Highland asked, what is your view about asking survey respondents about hypothetical responses to different policy scenarios, and then use those to inform the modeling? So do you have any comments or reactions to that? And then we can also open it to the rest.
Hi, can you hear me? Yeah, well, thank you for the question. Actually, this is very important, and this is directly related to the uncertainty in the input parameters. You mentioned a couple of examples of using, for example, like a panel, right, to get information from potential users of new products, or maybe different other ideas to get assumptions for those different hypothetical policy scenarios. But this is actually most related to how we can incorporate uncertainty for parameters that are related to policy scenarios. If we can incorporate in the modeling framework itself, naturally, uncertainty that are related to extreme scenarios, right? Minimum to maximum extreme scenarios. And then we can quantify those uncertainties to get uncertainties related to the output parameters. I think that will be a great solution for this problem. For example, expert elicitation, of course, is maybe expensive, right? And also time consuming. However, in the end of the day, what we got from expert elicitation, what we got is values that are mostly related to the minimum to maximum like scenarios that we can get, right? And then this come with, for example, the construction of prior information. For example, I mentioned about the Bayesian modeling framework that maybe modelers can explore, right? That naturally will incorporate this type of uncertainty into the modeling framework itself. So this is one of the challenges that we have as modelers, how to incorporate different tools, right, in this modeling framework to be able to estimate or to be able to incorporate uncertainty for input parameters. Actually, I'm not talking about uncertainty for output parameters, but uncertainty for the input parameters, and maybe exploring ways to introduce assumptions for these parameters, and also to incorporate mathematically that uncertainty into the modeling framework, that will be a solution that I'm just thinking on top of my head to try to answer that question.
Maybe before I open for others to comment, I'll just mention a couple of things. So tomorrow we have a session on the use of some of these approaches to inform the type of regulatory policy modeling that we're doing here. So we'll be covering discrete choice experiments, expert elicitations, experimental tobacco market, and Bayesian network approaches. So I guess shout out to tomorrow's first session. Also, Dr. Levy will also be telling the story of the modeling that we've done for the mental ban that started with a systematic review of all evidence, which included not just standard policy analysis of enacted, in this case, mental bans, but also results from discrete choice experiments and all of the above, plus our expert elicitation. I think the question is if FDA would consider all of those in certain ways. I guess we'll leave it open, but it seems paraphrasing Director Seller earlier, like publishing all of these so that then they can be used by other modelers, by FDA, by everybody else is extremely helpful. So yeah, I don't know if others have comments about this question of really getting into rather going beyond the traditional approaches to try to get a sense of the ranges of potential effects of policies using the approaches that have been mentioned and direct questioning to users rather than experts.
Well, my opinion is that what you are trying to do with a simulation model is reduce your uncertainty about an output. Either you want to know certain structure or you want to evaluate what's going to happen in the future, etc. So depending on how certain your inputs are, then you are going to have a range of a variability on the model. So if you have certain information that you think is valid, even though it has a lot of variability and the input, so if you put that, if it reduces your uncertainty of the output and is logical, then you're going to have you have to determine whether what you get, the output, is enough to answer the question you're posing. So is it helpful? If you're going to have a huge confidence intervals from 0 to 1 million, and the input parameters that you were you got, it was very loosely based, so you don't have confidence in not your output is going to be that helpful. So it depends, I think, but for what is that you want to do. There should be certain levels of quality or certain levels of certainty in your output in order to act on those.
And it sounds like we're actually pretty much in agreement on this. We should be free to use evidence in whatever form it arrives if it enhances our model building. And we talk about parameter estimation and the quality of the data that come in, and those are incredibly important. But there's a great paper that some of you may know. David Friedman wrote a paper called Statistical Models in Shoe Leather. And his point was, you can't stop thinking just because you got an elegant statistical model or you have the best sort of data. We haven't talked about this too much, but one of the things that models do is make it a little easier for us to think in causal language, because that's what this is about. And, in my experience, brief as it has been, it's the arguments we have with epidemiologists that tend to be the most frustrating, because it's not just how high quality a particular data source is do you understand what's going on? Do you know what you're trying to model? Does the uncertainty, as David has talked about, does the uncertainty inform the next iteration of the model in a way where knowledge is expanding? And so I don't know if I think this may be in a couple of the other presentations this week, but I think modeling, its effect on causal thinking is something that's really important for us.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, go ahead, David. Yeah, feel free to ask or continue or ask.
No, this was fascinating hearing the answers to this. And, you know, on this subject of uncertainty, I think Esther mentioned, you know, she's used different data sets and they have different estimates, and that's come up a lot. And also Jamie mentioned using different data sets also. And, you know, one solution that was given was present the results for the different data sets. But that kind of leaves decision makers in a quandary. So my question is, how might we go to the next step where we can say, okay, here's the different estimates, which should we rely on? Can we move in that direction?
I think it may depend on whether the use of different data sources leads to different conclusions. You know, I think it's certainly in the way that with comparative models, if multiple models reach similar qualitative conclusions, then you can have a great deal more confidence in those qualitative conclusions, even if the numbers differ. And I think your question about, you know, which data sources are the best data sources to be using, you know, we talk about certain data sources as if they're the kind of gold standard for modeling, when there are many shortcomings that like even with the NHIS, you know, landlines, telephone-based surveys, you know, they're like survey response rates, you know, how much more can we rely on these data sources as our you know, quote unquote, these sort of ideal data sources. So I think it's helpful to have not only multiple models, but multiple data sources that all kind of feed into, you know, feed into our conclusions.
I would like to also mention that there is a big challenge of pooling this information together, right? Because we will have, for example, for prevalence, we have prevalence from NHIS, we have prevalence for other, from PATH. Actually, those two are a very good examples because one is cross-sectional, the other longitudinal. So how we can use those different surveys that has different designs, right, into the models that we are building, and to get different, for example, outputs. If we, for example, notice that the prevalence change or vary between one of them is 13%, the other one is 10. So which one to use, right? That is more like, I think is more related to how to incorporate also uncertainty of those in those parameters. We can think on multiple strategies. One maybe is pulling the data together if we have similar designs. Another one is try to get into different ranges, right, for these different input parameters and try to see if we can incorporate sensitivity analysis for those, or trying to incorporate stochastic models, or, I mean, try to build stochastic models to be able to incorporate uncertainty for those parameters there. I guess the challenges are more like in terms of the mathematical framework that we are using right now that maybe cannot be used, and to account for those changes, right, in the model. I mean, in order to incorporate uncertainty, and how to get into the pooling of the data. So I think we need to think about that carefully and try to see what is the best solution, or maybe just trying to think on sensitivity analysis that are appropriate to incorporate different input parameters from different surveys.
Let me maybe, thank you. This is great, and again, more for us to think, and as we move to the second and third day. I want to ask, this is a set of, I guess, 3 questions still about policy. They were addressed to Doug Luke, but I think we can then open it for everybody. So I'm combining them. One comes from Alex Lever, one from Mike Cummings, and one just general. The first was, has Tobacco Town been used to examine compliance with underage sales laws? The second, some communities have enacted vaping flavor bans. Have you used Tobacco Town model to estimate intended and unintended consequence of those vaping flavor bans? And the third, which is, I guess, more generic, are you accounting for other policies in Tobacco Town when you're doing the yeah,
so yeah, so let me give very quick answers and then maybe segue to a broader policy discussion. The answer is no to the first. I can't even remember what the question was at this point, but have we done it in Tobacco Town? It was no. The second
underage sale laws.
Yes. The second one is we are looking at we're not using vape. We're not applying Tobacco Town to vaping yet. It's a possible future route, but we are looking at menthol bans. One of the interesting things here is in the density literature in terms of mapping availability of products, the typical approach is just do retailer density, but it gets more complicated when you think of like product restrictions where you might have the same number of tobacco retailers in a community, but they're not selling the same things. And so, you know, we're starting to think of something like product density, which is not tied to retailers, but product availability in a community. And then the third thing is, and I am going to channel Ross Hammond here. You develop a model, and you can't just say, all right, here's a tobacco model. Let's use it for alcohol now. That being said, we also as modelers do hold out the promise that once you develop a model, it's not exactly rapid response research, but we do make the argument, I think we heard it earlier today, that this type of modeling is faster than waiting for the real world to test certain things. Now, I don't know how fast any of our modeling work is, but there is promise that if you develop models or pieces of models that are based on certain underlying mechanics, that they can be applied in different situations. Certainly, for example, we are thinking that we can apply this model in DC and in Providence. So as always, the devil's in the details, but I do think policy research will be just really dramatically enhanced by using more computational modeling approaches. It's just too hard to study real world policies and wait for them to happen. We have to have other ways of examining that. And I'm really interested in others' thoughts on that.
Any other comments about it? I know David, Al,
I would like to mention
Esther.
something related to, for example, the construction of input parameters and related to what the use of agent-based modeling, right? For example, for specific regions, right? That we have maybe different policies in place. For example, trying to see how these policies affect the user behavior, right, among specific groups that we are interested in. For example, using simulations, using how people will react to a specific implemented policy in that specific region, and then try to see how that varies across the US, for example, and then try to incorporate all these analyses to inform us how tobacco use is going to change under hypothetical policies, right? And then we can have these outputs from those agent-based models to inform us for the population model to get the outcomes for the population as a whole. So I guess those are pieces, right, that we can explore, like using agent-based, for example, for construction of input parameters related to the construction for policy, hypothetical policies. For example, trying to see how in use, for example, the media is playing an important role, right? And how the changes are related to people who receive those messages, right? And if this is going to impact initiation. There are some analyses there that are related, for example, sentiment analysis, text mining, right? How the publicity is going to impact youth, right, to use a new product. So we can use this type of underlying data, right, to construct modeling. And this is micro simulation. This is agent-based models. So we can try to establish modeling strategies to help us to build those parameters, and that can inform us for the micro simulation modeling that we are exploring. So this is just one example, one idea that how we can incorporate those modeling strategies and how we can incorporate micro simulation with micro simulation and macro simulation, agent-based modeling, compartmental models, etc., and trying to explore different data sources and trying to pull data together. Just ideas that we can explore.
Yeah, I'd like to make a suggestion along those lines where I think that agent-based models can be especially useful. And you know, in your models, Doug, the focus is on retail. In vaping, it's hard to say, but it's, you know, kind of, that's a section. But then there's, you know, the internet, and there's vape shops, which is kind of a different type of retail. I don't know how it's related, but where I think agent-based models can be useful is they can consider a range of different choices that the individual can make between these different sources.
Yeah, and one of the advantages is that you can have different kinds of agents in agent-based models. So diversity and heterogeneity. And so you can have, you know, physical stores, and the internet is a type of store, and sharing. I mean, this is a very complicated model, but at least in theory, you can incorporate that heterogeneity in that kind of model.
Yeah, I want to mention, following up on something that Doug said, and following up on also Esther. I think Doug touched a very important point, is that we are looking and very concerned all the time about data, and data is, you know, the data to populate our model, to put parameters in our model. When the real I think value of a modeler is to come up with a structure that represents reality, right? So we have two things: data to populate the model, and then model the specification. Is, do we have the model that reproduces the phenomenon? And that's modeling, right? And if you have a model that is very dependent on parameters, and it changes behavior when you change the parameters, then you are in not a very good shape. So what I think right now, I think we have models that are dependent on a lot of exogenous parameters. And if, for example, Esther, you know, put a very good example about how to model the parameters, how to internalize, how to endogenize, for example, the initiation rate. Now I don't have to be looking at how this initiation rate is going to change, and I model the initiation rate. So I use an agent-based model, and it's going to tell me how the initiation rate might be changing, and so on and so forth, right? So at a point, we should be looking for models that depends on very few parameters that we can easily obtain, and that do not change the major response of the system of what we're modeling. So it's when we get there, then we have something stable that can accommodate very many different situations, I think.
So I hate to be the party pooper, but I think we just to respect the participants wrap up. There were some interesting things. I'll just again mention it. There was a very good question by Jalet Tan, who's a doctoral student here in Michigan, related to everything that we've talked about, but the way he framed it was in response to your counterfactual example, David, where he says, how can you validate or know that your counterfactual is correct, or that is giving reasonable results since you don't have real data, right? And this is related to the policy questions in this case, not just in general, right? As a counterfactual of a different reality. I think overall we cover most topics. Let me see if there's anything. I think there was a specific question by Mike Cummings. We'll leave it for the rest of the sessions, but how does FDA plans to use path data into your modeling or in the modeling that you're doing? I think as of now, if I recall correctly, path wasn't featured as one of the data sources. So I think that may be a question that is open for everybody, not only, of course, FDA, and certainly we are starting to move in that direction, given everything that PATH provides, but maybe it's not there yet. And I think we'll come back to this discussion of the. I like how you're framing, Doug. That it's not rapid response, or it's really coming up with the right type of how quickly you can respond to challenges posed by the public and the regulator and the field. But in general, there might be something there in terms of like maybe data sources that are more readily available in a faster time might be easier for the modelers that rely on them to then be that more responsive. So we'll come back to those issues there. I think we had a few remarks that we were going to make, David, Livy, and I will just say my thanks everybody. And tomorrow we start at noon. We'll start with the session about these new forms of data, or not necessarily new, to inform our modeling and examples from data or people who are producing that data and discussions that they can inform all of us. So I think that will be great. And then the second half will be on the new generation of modelers. So I just want to thank you everyone for participating, and let you have the final word, David. Levy. Yeah.
No, you summed it up well. I think tomorrow's session is going to get into lots of the issues that were raised today, and in particular, how we could use different sources of data. And we're going to have the opportunity to hear from some of our young researchers doing work in modeling, and they're our future. So you definitely want to hear that.
And what I'm going to say, and I know, I mean, some people have already left, but those who are still here, thank you for staying. We went a little longer. We do hope, and we know it's hard, that you can join as many sessions as possible, because in the end, all of those will inform the discussions that we have on Wednesday. The recordings will be, of course, posted. Eventually, we're going to try to see if we can get speakers to agree to share, if not all, part of their slides sets. So we'll make sure that all the information is captured and available to all of you, but it'd be great to have your thoughts and participation throughout the 3 days. So without that, and without anything left, I want to thank our speakers for today, for the second session. Dr. Luke, Jamie, Tam, David Mendez, and Esther Salazar, and in the morning, Ken Warner and Mitch Seller. And thank you all for staying today, and we'll see you tomorrow at noon. Have a great rest of your day, and thank you, by the way, to the organization team and the tech support and everything. I think we've made it through the first days. Thank you. It is thank you. Thanks to you. All right. Have a good one, and we'll see you tomorrow.